The last scheduled passenger train to enter the original Cascade Tunnel was the Great Northern Railway's Seattle Express on January 12, 1929. The tunnel closed permanently the next day when the new, longer tunnel opened 2 miles south. Engineers sealed the western portal with concrete and timber. The eastern portal received similar treatment. Inside, in the middle of the 2.63-mile bore, sat a work train that had been assembling equipment for the final tunnel inspection. The crew had removed the locomotive and rolling stock, but they'd left behind a single flat car loaded with tools, timber, and surveying equipment. Nobody bothered retrieving it. The tunnel was closed. The flat car would sit in darkness until the mountain reclaimed it. 91 years later, in 2020, a railroad historian named Michael Chen was researching the original Cascade Tunnel for a book about early mountain railroading. He'd obtained access to Great Northern Railway's archived maintenance logs from the 1920s. One entry, dated January 11, 1929, mentioned the flat car. Work car 4419 left in tunnel center section. Equipment aboard. Retrieval not economical given closure timeline. The note included the flat car's last known position, approximately 1.3 miles from the western portal. Chen contacted BNSF Railway, which had inherited the Great Northern system. He wanted to know if the original tunnel still existed and whether it might be accessible for historical documentation. BNSF's response surprised him. The tunnel was intact, structurally sound according to periodic inspections, and potentially accessible through the sealed portals if proper safety protocols were followed. More surprisingly, nobody had entered the tunnel since 1929. The 1929 sealing had been so complete that even subsequent engineering surveys had relied on the original construction plans rather than physical inspection. BNSF agreed to sponsor an exploratory entry in August 2020, primarily for engineering assessment but with allowance for historical documentation. The team included structural engineers and a mining safety specialist, and Chen as historical consultant. The plan was to cut through the western portal seal, enter with proper ventilation and safety equipment, document the tunnel's condition, and determine whether the 1929 flat car still existed. The cutting operation took 3 days. The concrete and timber seal had held remarkably well. Too well, actually. Water seepage had been minimal, which meant the tunnel's interior had remained relatively dry. And this was unusual for a mountain tunnel that had been sealed for 91 years. Most abandoned tunnels flood or collapse within decades. The Cascade Tunnel's exceptional engineering, built to withstand the weight of an entire mountain, had preserved it almost perfectly. On August 19, 2020, the team entered the tunnel. The air quality surprised them immediately. The tunnel wasn't filled with stagnant, oxygen-depleted air. Ventilation analysis showed slow but continuous airflow from east to west, and suggesting the eastern portal seal wasn't completely airtight. The tunnel temperature held steady at 48 degrees Fahrenheit, cold but not freezing, consistent with the surrounding mountain's geological temperature. The tunnel interior looked frozen in time. The walls showed the original 1900 drill marks from construction. The track remained in place, rails still bolted to the timber ties that had been installed 120 years earlier. The timber showed rot in places, but the rails themselves were remarkably preserved, uncoated in a fine layer of rust that had formed slowly in the dry air. At one point, 3 miles from the western portal, exactly where the 1929 maintenance log had indicated, they found flat car 4419. The wooden flat car bed had deteriorated significantly. Large sections had rotted away, and what remained was crumbling. But the metal frame, wheels, and undercarriage were intact. The equipment loaded on the flat car in 1929 was still there. Surveying equipment, hand tools, timber beams, lanterns, and what appeared to be personal items left behind by the work crew, lunch pails, a thermos, work gloves. Chen documented everything. The surveying equipment was a 1920s-era transit theodolite, worth a small fortune to collectors if it could be preserved. The hand tools were standard railroad maintenance equipment. Wrenches, hammers, pry bars, all showing the patina of age, but structurally sound. The timber beams were dry and brittle. The lanterns still contained kerosene, though the fuel had likely degraded chemically. The personal items proved most poignant. One lunch pail still contained remnants of what had been someone's meal, a glass jar that had once held something, now empty, and a metal fork. The thermos was dented but intact. The work gloves were stiff with age, the leather dried to the point of cracking. These were the ordinary objects of working life in 1929, abandoned when the tunnel closed and preserved by the mountain's darkness. The team spent 8 hours documenting the tunnel and the flat car, while structural engineers confirmed the tunnel was sound. No significant cracks, minimal water damage, the rock walls stable. The flat car could potentially be removed, though the deteriorated wooden bed made transport risky. The equipment and personal items could definitely be recovered for museum preservation. The decision about what to remove became complicated. BNSF owned the tunnel and everything in it, but the historical value of leaving the flat car in place versus removing it for preservation sparked debate. But Chen argued for partial removal. Take the portable items for museum display, but leave the flat car itself as a historical marker. Moving it risked destroying the deteriorated wood entirely, and the flat car's location in the tunnel center was itself part of the historical record. BNSF agreed to Chen's proposal. Over the following weeks, a recovery team carefully removed the surveying equipment, tools, lanterns, and personal items. Everything went to the Northwest Railway Museum in Snoqualmie, Washington, where preservation specialists began the delicate work of stabilizing 91-year-old materials. The flat car remained in the tunnel at mile marker 1.3, a ghost of the tunnel's working life. The story attracted media attention when the museum announced the artifact acquisition. News outlets ran variations of train car discovered after 91 years in sealed tunnel and time capsule railroad equipment found in mountain. The coverage was factually accurate, but emphasized the discovery's dramatic elements: sealed tunnel, forgotten equipment, nearly a century of isolation. Some coverage framed it as a train that disappeared and was found 100 years later, which wasn't exactly wrong, but oversimplified what had actually happened. The flat car hadn't disappeared. It had been deliberately left behind and documented in maintenance records. It hadn't been lost. Its location was known and recorded. What made the discovery significant wasn't mystery, but preservation. 91 years of undisturbed existence had created an unintentional time capsule of 1920s railroad work. But the theodolite proved particularly valuable for historians. Surveying equipment from the 1920s rarely survives in working condition because it was expensive and therefore carefully maintained, eventually wearing out through use. Museum pieces tend to be display models or equipment that failed and was retired. The tunnel theodolite represented working equipment in the condition it would have been used, complete with the minor damage and wear patterns that reveal how railroad workers actually operated these instruments. And the lunch pail and thermos generated unexpected public interest. Something about the mundane intimacy of a worker's forgotten lunch resonated more than the technical equipment. The museum received dozens of inquiries from people wanting to know whose lunch it was, whether the worker could be identified, what they'd been eating. The answer to all those questions was no. The maintenance logs didn't list crew members' names, and the lunch contents had degraded beyond identification decades ago. Chen's book, The Forgotten Tunnel, Engineering and Abandonment in the Cascade Mountains, published in 2022, devoted a chapter to the flat car discovery. His argument was that the significance wasn't in the discovery itself, but in what the flat car's preservation revealed about the original tunnel's exceptional engineering. The fact that a wooden flat car and its equipment could survive 91 years in a sealed mountain tunnel demonstrated how well the tunnel had been built in 1900. Poor drainage would have rotted everything. Excessive moisture would have accelerated rust. Structural problems would have collapsed portions of the tunnel. None of that had happened. The original Cascade Tunnel had been an engineering achievement when it opened in 1900. At 2.63 miles, it was the longest railroad tunnel in North America at the time. Building it required drilling through solid granite, using hand tools and black powder explosives. Workers died during construction. Official records list 19 deaths, though some historians believe the actual number was higher. The tunnel solved Great Northern's major problem: crossing the Cascade Mountains without the dangerous and expensive switchbacks that had plagued earlier operations. The tunnel operated for 29 years before the longer, lower elevation tunnel replaced it in 1929. The newer tunnel eliminated some of the grades and curves that had made the original tunnel operationally challenging. When Great Northern sealed the original tunnel, they were closing a chapter of railroad history. They likely didn't imagine that sealing would preserve it so completely that 91 years later, engineers would find it almost exactly as it had been left. The flat car remains in the tunnel. BNSF sealed the western portal again after the recovery operation. The eastern portal remains sealed as it has been since 1929. The tunnel sits under the mountain, unchanged, the flat car sitting at mile 1.3 on rails that haven't carried traffic since before the Great Depression. But it's not accessible to the public and likely never will be. The safety and liability concerns are too significant, but the artifacts at the Northwest Railway Museum tell the story. The theodolite sits in a climate-controlled case. The tools are displayed with explanations of their use. The lunch pail and thermos occupy a small exhibit about the human side of railroad work, and photographs from the 2020 tunnel entry show the flat car in its dark home, exactly where workers left it on January 11, 1929. So the train that disappeared into a mountain and came out 100 years later is really the story of what happens when exceptional engineering meets intentional abandonment. The tunnel was built so well that sealing it in 1929 created an accidental preservation chamber. The flat car didn't disappear. It waited. And when engineers finally opened the tunnel 91 years later, they found not a mystery, but a testament to the quality of work done by people who knew they were building something meant to last, even if they couldn't have imagined it would last this way.